All right, everyone. So as I said, I'm first going to go over some really interesting artists that have explored more spooky themes. There's going to be a lot of talking about war. So not just things like different creatures, which Goya definitely goes into, but there's a lot of looking at kind of horrors that humanity is capable of. So that's going to be a theme in the lecture today. Another thing that I'll be talking about in the lecture is the use of maquettes. So this is the maquette, or the little sculpture that I created for our still life of Oogie Boogie from Nightmare Before Christmas. One of the artists that we'll be looking at today, Ivan Albright, would make really intricate and incredibly interesting maquettes for his own paintings. And I'll show you examples of my own work. So this can be a really interesting thing for you all to consider, especially as we get into our project. You can be sculpting your own. And for my intermediate painters, we're going to be doing this together next week. Then I also, not really a maquette, but here's the pumpkin, also for the still life. So I am now going to bring up our PowerPoint for today. Okay. And if you have a question, then you can unmute yourself. If you don't need to talk right now, please mute yourself so there's not a bunch of background noise. So I'm going to begin to share my PowerPoint. And I'm also going to start to use my mic so that you can't hear my 3-year-old nephew playing in the background so much. So here we go. Let me actually you. So I'm gonna go to slideshow. Okay, so 1 second. There we go. Okay, so please mute yourself if you don't have a question. I can definitely hear somebody in the background. Thank you. Okay. So spooky paintings, we'll be talking about these different artists that are kind of masters of the macabre. So we'll look at Goya, Deeks, and Albright, some of which we've already looked at this semester. I will go into their work a little bit deeper now. Okay, so Francisco Goya, so this is from the Met Museum. He was active or born between 1746 and died in 1828. So he is regarded as one of the most important Spanish artists of the late 18th century. And he's kind of coming on the tails of Velázquez, who's another epic Spanish painter. He was definitely very inspired by Velázquez. Over the course of his long career, Goya moved from this kind of jolly and lighthearted painter who also is kind of displaying his skills very elegantly within his paintings. We'll look at an example of that in the next slide. To a painter who became deeply sort of pessimistic. And you can really see that transformation in his work. He also experienced a lot of turmoil within Spain, changes in government, war, etc. And you can see that all of that kind of history and all of that kind of also just turmoil in general happening at the time, beginning to permeate his paintings, right? So when we look at artwork, you always have to sort of consider what's the context here that is making this piece look the way that it does, right? So first, this is kind of earlier Goya. It's a portrait of this little little boy, and it's a great display of these different skills. He has these gorgeous reflections. He has more extreme darks and lights within this little boy, and these reflections showing this reflective material. And then this little drum back here is not painted with as much contrast in value, which is making it kind of push back in space a bit. So he has a really excellent sort of showing of space, even though it's not super deep back there, he's still sort of showing that something is in front. That's through this control of value structure and also color. There's more intense colors within this boy, so sort of bringing him into focus. And it's a real display of skills, kind of like how we had looked at these Vanitas still lifes earlier in the semester and how these artists were sort of showing off different things that they could capture. That's kind of something that Goya is also doing here, which is part of how Goya ultimately became a court painter. So he was, employed and sustained by the Spanish court. But as you move deeper into Goya's career, you can see him exploring the kind of darker aspects of humanity. This piece is called The Sleep of Reason. And also exploring the impacts of war. So this is also from the Met Museum. This is the best known image from Goya's series of 80 aquatint etchings created in 1799, known as The Sleep of Reason. They're generally understood as the artist's criticism of society in which he lived. Goya worked on the series from 1796 to 98. So he did this whole large suite of these prints that were all critiquing society in some way. You can see as reason falls asleep, this whole flood of monsters emerges, which is very relevant today. Okay, and here is another really kind of spooky, spooky painting from Goya. This is called Saturn Devouring His Son. This Goya made between 1819 to 1823. He actually first created this as a mural inside of this large sort of farmhouse that he was living within. So he was actually living around this painting. It's incredibly visceral. And it's also very interesting. We're going to look at a detail now. Because Goya could paint in a hyper-illusionistic kind of fashion, but here he's painting much more viscerally. The paint is kind of thicker in sections, it's more gestural, and it's important to sort of recognize that he's making that very conscious sort of aesthetic choice, and that it goes with this haunting image of Saturn devouring his son. And it looks like Saturn has no sort of control over what he's doing, right? So the way that Goya is deciding to paint this subject is also reflecting the emotion and the story that he wants to tell. And this is also important to sort of recognize that the creation of art isn't always about creating an aesthetically pleasing experience. Sometimes it's about imparting a message that can be uncomfortable, which can be a critique of society. It can be a critique of even our kind of human nature, but it doesn't always have to be this aesthetically pleasing thing. In fact, sometimes it needs to be jarring, visually jarring, in order to impart that real message and story that the artist wants to tell. Okay, and then this is a painting called The 3rd of May, 1808 by Goya. So Goya, if we go back for a moment, Goya is telling this story from mythology, but then also some of Goya's most haunting works, like this painting, are about the things that humanity is capable of. So this is exploring the topic of war and of these unnecessary killings. And that's also going to be a theme throughout these different artists that are creating these kind of morbid works. There can both be moments where they are exploring things from myth and almost kind of monsters and creatures, but really some of the most haunting works are really about the sort of monstrous acts that humanity itself can commit. Okay, that brings us to Otto Dix. We looked at Otto Dix earlier in the semester as well with his war triptych. We'll take a look at that again today. Otto Dix is a German artist who's best known for his paintings and prints that were filled with anguish and exploited human figures. He's really representing the turmoil of his time. He lived during one of the most tumultuous periods of modern German history, from World War I through World War II and the division of Germany after its defeat. So he experienced a lot. This fed his deep-rooted interest in dark social contexts and the human types that emerge from them. So when he's looking at these different wars, what does that do to a human being? What happens to human beings after going through that? As he remarked, you have to see a man in an unbridled state in order to know something about him. And that was from MoMA, which has quite a bit of Dix's work. So this is a much quieter kind of Dix. He created this as a commission. So he did a lot of portrait commissions. It's quiet, but I still think it's quietly creepy. This was a portrait that he made of Dr. Maya Herman, who is a throat specialist. So he's surrounded the doctor with all of these different instruments that he uses. He's also used this reflective, this circular reflective mirror, which actually is something that a lot of artists have done, particularly the pre-Raphaelites. So that might be a nod to the pre-Raphaelites by using this circular mirror. But you know, the color is very neutralized and kind of grim, and these instruments just have a sort of cold feeling to them. You wouldn't necessarily want to be operated on in this room. So it's kind of quietly creepy. Dix also could be very sort of clear though. If we look at clearly creepy. So this is the war triptych from Otto Dix. Now, remember earlier in the semester when we talked about Dix, we also talked about his own experiences in war. Like many artists in this time, Dix was sent to war, and he was part of this group of people experiencing trench warfare and also experiencing chemical warfare. And that became a huge aesthetic influence into Dix's work. He was in these trenches, he was seeing people hit by chemical warfare, and he was seeing things like sort of melting flesh, right? And sort of true horrors of war. So Dix is bringing that into his artwork, and he's also trying to really show what that experience is like and provide this social commentary and also, you know, a warning against war. And how he's also building this image and these different ideas is through this color. If we're looking at these reds in the background, this kind of inferno, the way that he's painted the flesh of the people within this painting, particularly this figure, is very cold, right? Which when you're looking at a human being, you don't want to see greens or yellows going into green as well. That's a very kind of disturbing color combination for us just looking at that, right? That starts to make you think of death and decay. So he's making all of those choices very consciously. And he's building up the painting very thick in some sections, which also gives this kind of visceral sort of texture. Okay, and then this is a print from Deeks's War series, also showing the trenches. So Otto Deeks also made this whole suite of prints, much like Goya, on war. And with these prints, he could also make many more of these prints than, say, that large war triptych painting. So he would make this suite of prints, and then he could be dispersing these prints and kind of sharing this message in a larger way. And this is an etching in copper and also aquatint. Okay, one of the last artists I'm going to show you today before we get started painting is Ivan Albright, who is called the Master of the Macabre. So Chicago, and this is from the Art Institute of Chicago, which has quite a bit of Albright's work. Chicago native Ivan Albright remains one of the most uncompromising artists of the 20th century. He's called the Master of the Macabre and was famous for his richly detailed paintings of ghoulish subjects. A medical draftsman during World War I, Albright portrayed the body's vulnerability to age, disease, and death in works that provoked outrage and admiration. So if we think back to Deeks, who was also experiencing World War I, World War II, Ivan Albright was as well on the American side. But he was seeing these same horrors of war. And they're really interesting artists to look at sort of next to each other because they have a lot of aesthetic similarities. So Albright, this was a painting he created inspired by Oscar Wilde's A Picture of Dorian Gray. So this was created between 1943 to 1944. Ivan Albright painted this lurid portrait for the Oscar-winning movie adaptation of Wilde's 1891 novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. In Wilde's tale, Dorian Gray commissions a portrait of himself as an attractive young man and later trades his soul for an ever youthful appearance. As the still handsome Gray leads an increasingly desolate and evil life, his painted representation rots and decays, revealing the extent of his moral corruption. Albright's renown as a painter of the macabre made him the ideal choice for this commission. All right, so let's also look at a detail of this because it's very built up. So these are incredibly kind of labor-intensive works. Albright would really, if you look at these in person, they're just incredibly crusty in some areas. He really built up the paint and built up a lot of detail in here. So it's, I both find it kind of disgusting and also beautiful at the same time. All right, here's another of Albright's work. So this is called A Face from Georgia. And you'll often see this with Albright, that it will be 1970 through 1974. So he had a very labor-intensive process, and he's very meticulous and obsessive. So often his works would take years to complete. Okay, and this one is the greatest example of that of work taking years and years to complete. And this is really one of the creepiest paintings, I think, in this whole presentation. So the title is Poor Room. There is no time, no end, no today, no yesterday, no tomorrow, only the forever and forever and forever without end. So this painting is incredibly interesting. It's kind of spiraling in on itself. There's this endlessness to it. There's all of these textures and kind of morbid use of color. And this painting he worked on at length for many different periods. So at first from 1942 to 43, 1948 to 55, then 1957 to 63. So he really spent a lot of time on this painting and built it up over time. Okay, oh, one more thing. Let's go back for a moment. And one thing with Albright is that he would build these maquettes to be working from. So he'd make these little sculptures, which he then could light in a way that he wanted to. whether that's using one sort of directional natural light or even using different colorful lights. This is an incredibly great process to use for your own works. So now I'll show you. This is an example of a little still life that I set up. That's some seaweed. I like those shapes within seaweed, a skull that I have, and these copper lights. Then this is a little sculpture, sort of abstract shape that I created using Sculpey. And what I love about this is that you can make whatever kind of shape that you want, even if that's a sort of abstract shape, but then you can take that shape and light it and see what the value structure and light is actually like on that shape. So oftentimes when you're looking at works that are very creative and imaginative, sometimes artists will be making that purely from invention, and they have a lot of practice in value structure and color, and they're applying that knowledge. But oftentimes too, an artist will also be creating a scene like this maquette to work from, so they can see what actually happens with that shape under the light. And then they might also be combining that with their own sense of invention and creativity. But oftentimes working purely from your head can be quite difficult. So sometimes it's a really good option to take the time and make a reference for yourself to use. So then this is the painting I created from that. All right, and that brings us back to the still life that we'll be working from today, where I had this maquette and this little pumpkin as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to drop the photo that I'll be using for the demo today into the chat for those that want to use the same photo I'm using. You can use a different photo, so I've uploaded those photos onto our Canvas page, both in the beginning and intermediate sections. So there's different options there. Let me pull up the chat window. All right, so I'm gonna drop that in now. And the reference I'm using, it has my pumpkin, it has the little sculpture that I made, and then I also put in Christmas lights because it's a Nightmare Before Christmas themed still life. You might be super intimidated by the Christmas lights. Don't be, I'll show you how to paint them. I'll probably have to do that in a separate demo video. We're gonna focus on the pumpkin today. But you don't have to paint the Christmas lights. That's gonna be an option. If you do try to do that, I'll give you up to 10 points of extra credit. But you could also just be painting the pumpkin or just the pumpkin and Oogie Boogie. So there are those photos again on the Canvas page. Does everybody have a photo to work from? And you could also be setting up your own still life at home. All right. And taking your silence as a, yes, Chloe, you're doing great. Have that photo, totally fine. All right, cool. All right, everyone, so let's get started mixing some paints. So we're gonna pre-mix everything. And then we'll get started drawing. So let me just pull up my palette pen. And if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me. I like when people talk to me. All right.
I have questions. I just want to say hi. I popped in a little late.
Hi. Hi, Amy.
Hey.
Hey.
Love your costume.
Thank you. I have my donut little hat thing too. I'll put it. I'm afraid of it falling in the paint though, so I don't want to put it back on.
Oh.
I'll put it back on at the end. Okay, so here's my palette. Remember, just some good reminders for everybody. We're putting our paint up at the top. We want to give ourselves a big mixing area to use. The way I'm arranging my paint is essentially like I've taken my color wheel and I've unfurled it, right? So I'm not putting it down in random spots, starting with my yellows. I know this is a burnt umber, but this is essentially orange. If you took orange, made it as dark as possible, it would be burnt umber. So yellow, orange, red, and then blue, green. And then of course, titanium white and my solvent-free gel. So I'm gonna start by putting out all of my paint here. Cadmium yellow, definitely be using that today. With our oranges on this pumpkin, and especially for the lighter parts of the pumpkin. I'm gonna use that cadmium yellow to create some of those lights. I'm gonna put out some yellow ochre too, that will also be useful for parts of the pumpkin. Burnt umber, pan this down a little bit, there we go. Okay. Burnt umber, I'll be using this combined with my ultramarine blue to mix a cooler neutral for the tablecloth and also for Oogie Boogie and for some of those deep shadows within the pumpkin as well. Cadmium red, again for our pumpkin. And alizarin crimson. I'm not going to use a ton of this today, so I'm just going to put a little bit out, but I will likely use that maybe in some sections of the pumpkin, but also for the Christmas lights. Blue. Okay. And I'm going to put out a little bit of phthalo green. So this will be great for the strand of the Christmas light, though I'll neutralize it a little bit. And also for some of those green lights that they're very close to phthalo green. But again, if you're not painting the Christmas lights, you don't really have to put out the phthalo green in particular. Okay, and I'm gonna put out a big pile of titanium white. And also my solvent-free gel as my medium. All right. Okay, so let's begin. Let's see. Focus. There we go. Okay. All right, so let's begin with our cool neutral. And as we start to get into mixing today, I want you to think about those 4 different qualities of color. So chroma, temperature, value, hue. And let's actually talk about that a little bit before I get started mixing. So who can tell me what hue means? What is hue? I also might start calling on people because you should definitely know what hue is by this point. Albert, you want to tell me? Go for it.
It's another name for color, or just the definition of color?
Yeah, it's like the color family, right? So it's the name, exactly. So when you say something is orange, now it's helpful to have that bit of information, but if someone just tells you paint that wall orange, well, there's so many different oranges, right? You need more information. So that's where you have to start to go into these other aspects of color, like chroma. Who can tell me what chroma means? Anybody? Signorina, I feel like you know what chroma means.
Ask Amy, she knows.
Amy would know too, but she's not my current student. And I know Signorina knows because I can see it in her paintings. You have some nice chromatic lights. You're muted, Signorina. I can see that you're talking.
Sorry, I was like
That's
trying
okay.
to, I was trying to draw what I was gonna paint. So sorry,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
So chroma would be like the lighting and the color right, or am I wrong?
You're wrong, but I feel like you're pretty you're kind of close. You're close.
Intensity. Oh, excuse
Bless
me.
you. Bless
Were
you.
you doing a sneaky sneeze there, Ron?
I was trying to just help.
Did you sneeze intensity?
I did.
Yeah, it is intensity. It's the saturation. So the purity, the brightness. So you might have been saying lightness, brightness, right? So that's going to be how intense that color is. So in the pumpkin, in the light, we're going to be mixing some more intense oranges. But as it gets into the shadow areas, it's going to go both darker and also less intensive chroma, or in other words, neutral. So it's going to become more neutral, okay? So you need to know the color, not just the color's name, the starting point, but you also need to know the chroma that you're going for. Okay, and then what about value? Who can tell me what value means? Value. Matthew, how about you? What does value mean? Or Ariana, were you raising your hand? Can't tell.
No, but
No? Okay.
I could tell you what it means. Maybe.
Tell me what it means.
Value, does it mean the different shades of color from dark to light?
Yes, yeah. So yes, exactly. So it's that scale going from light to dark. So tints would be the lighter parts of that scale. Shades would be the darker parts. Tones would be the middle section. All right, and then last thing, and this is going to be really important as we mix stuff out, is the temperature. Who can tell me what temperature means when we're talking about color? What does temperature mean? Ron, I feel like you really want to tell. Oh, you're really. Ron is method acting temperature right now. Albert, you want to say it? Go for it.
Yeah, temperature is the difference between a warm color and a cool color.
Yes.
To just bring that painting either to the cool side, to the warm side.
Yes. Okay. So temperature is the warmth or the coolness. And that is a really important one. And I wanted to talk about all that stuff before we start mixing, because those different parts of color are going to directly impact how we mix these colors. So for example, on my pumpkin, when I'm mixing for this pumpkin, it's a very warm color, right? What happens when I add white into a warm color? What effect does white have when you add it into something?
Pastel.
Pastel, and it cools it down. It cools it down. So when you add this into a warm color, it makes it feel pastel-y. Exactly. So and it's not that we can't ever add white into warm colors. We will a little bit, but we're also going to use yellow, which is the lightest color in this whole spectrum in terms of its value. We're going to use yellow as a way of lightening those oranges too. So you have to think about temperature when you're mixing a color, because if you just mix white into something, it cools it down. That's going to disrupt the way that a warm color will look. We want to avoid that. So as we mix the oranges, we're going to be really aware of that. Anyway, so let's get started. Let's start with our cool neutral. So we're going to make that with a combination of burnt umber. This is usually where I start. So burnt umber and ultramarine blue. I'm going to be putting a little bit more of the blue in there, because I want to lean this neutral into blue. It's a little bit cooler. I still want it pretty much neutralized, so in between orange and blue. Remember, our burnt umber is basically orange, but I want it slightly more on the cool side. So that's what I'm seeing in this still life setup. If I had a warmer gray kind of cloth that I put down, then I would be mixing a warmer gray neutral. But I'm seeing that cloth as a bit more on the cool side. Okay, we'll make sure we fully mix this. I think I might need a little bit more burnt umber in here. I think this might be a little bit too blue. So wiping my palette knife off before I go back into my pile of pure color. A little bit more of this burnt umber. Okay, and today I'm going to be mixing out this neutral and then also the colors for the pumpkin. So this neutral I'm mixing will both be used for the tablecloth and then also the Oogie Boogie character. And the Christmas lights, we'll see if we get there today. I'm not gonna mix those right now though. Don't think we'll have time. So I will likely be addressing those in a separate demo video that I will upload for all of you this weekend. Okay, now obviously when you're creating neutrals like this, it goes incredibly dark and it can be hard to see what the temperature is actually like because it's so dark in value. You scrape it up, you can start to see that a little bit more. And I can see that this is really kind of leaning towards blue. Then I can also do a little test by taking a little bit, adding some white into that. And then I can see it is leaning towards blue and I like that. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna begin by mixing out my middle gray. Let me clean this up a little bit. Organize that. So I'm gonna grab some of this. I'm gonna start by mixing that middle gray, which I'll then mix my darker grays from and my lighter grays. So big pile of that neutral. This is also kind of chromatic black. Grabbing some of my white. And I'm aiming for a gray that's kind of in the middle of my value scale. Okay, and turn this up a little bit. Start to get into different scales. And with these value scales, the goal is that you're giving yourself different options to both address the shadow families and light families. You're kind of organizing your thoughts with your color and value before you start painting. That's why I like pre-mixing. Means that when I go to paint, I can really be thinking more about paint application and where I need to be placing these values. I don't have to be mixing every couple of minutes. Okay, so now I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna use this middle gray to make my other values. So I'll start with the lighter side. I'm gonna do a bigger pile right there, a little bit less, and just a little bit of that gray. Okay, so this is our strategic way of mixing a value scale starting from the middle gray. So now I'm gonna grab a bunch of white, make this very light gray. So this will be nice for the areas of intense light on the tablecloth and perhaps also the areas of highlight on Oogie Boogie. Okay. Got that all mixed. Now I'm going to use this lighter gray. What I have on my palette knife, I'm going to mix that into this other pile I just made. So remember, this way of mixing makes it a lot easier to get these different steps in a value scale rather than trying to mix everything purely from black and white, which can be very hard. You're trying to mix every single step just for black and white. Mixing this way ensures you're going to get these different distinctive steps. Okay, now for this next pile, again, I'm going to take what's on my palette knife. I'll take a little bit of this lighter gray too and mix that into this pile of mid-gray. Okay, so now, there we go. Let's do our darker side. And it's essentially the same process, but now I'll be adding my dark neutral into that. So I'm going to start with grabbing some of that middle gray, making a larger pile right here. And I'll maybe just do 2 steps. So that, and then another small pile right there. And then if I need to, I can always return and mix more intermediate colors if that's what I need. Okay, so up here, I'm gonna add some of that really dark neutral. Okay, and then again, I'll take what's on my palette knife from what I just mixed, maybe a little bit of this dark neutral, and mix that into this other pile of mid-gray. Okay, so now I have this different, this value scale of my cooler neutral. So let's get into the orange. Probably need to get more paper towels. Okay, so with the orange, I'm going to begin by identifying the local color, which is really kind of the secondary orange. And then for parts of the light, it goes into more of a yellow orange. But I'll start with that secondary orange. So I'm going to be doing that, and I want to keep it chromatic so it really kind of shines. So you can see that. Okay. So I'm going to start with my cadmium yellow, which is a very bright chromatic yellow. Okay. Cadmium yellow. And then I'm going to be combining that with my cadmium red, which is also a nice chromatic and also warm red. So this warm red is going to be quite nice for making chromatic oranges. The alizarin crimson is a cooler red. So if you're making an orange from the crimson, it's going to feel a little bit more neutralized because it has a cooler temperature.
Because of the blue.
Exactly. It's a red that is leaning kind of towards blue. So when you're combining that with a yellow, it's going to start to, basically it's kind of like you're making a little bit of brown in that.
What would happen if that was a cool yellow?
A cool yellow? I think it would still be kind of neutral.
I think it would be more neutral.
That's totally true, actually, yeah. Because you're trying to mix a warm color, orange, but if you're mixing it from cooler, every single color has warm and cool versions of it, but if you're mixing an orange from a cooler yellow and a cooler red, it's going to be more neutralized. So it would be more, look more brown.
The orange would have more blue, and the red would mess with the greens because when
Right.
you mix with yellow, so you got double complements mixing.
Totally. Yeah, double complementary combinations, and we know when we combine complements, that makes a neutral, which is what we'll be doing today with this orange. We're gonna add blue into
That's
it.
what we're doing too. Color theory.
Nice. With the 101 classes, Ron?
With 101 and with 2D.
Nice. Okay, so I'm actually gonna mix a little bit more of this orange because I'm gonna kind of use it like I just used this middle gray, where I use the middle gray to make my lighter grays and also the darker grays. So I wanna mix a little bit more so I'll have, I can use it both for my lighter oranges and my darker oranges. And we'll be applying, like Ron was just saying, we're going to be applying our knowledge of the color wheel into this value scale to make the darker versions of this orange. So when you combine a color with its complementary color, you're going to get a neutral, and it's also going to get darker, which is what we need for our shadows. Okay, so I'm going to start to mix the lights. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some of this secondary orange that I've mixed. Okay. Which I will say it looks redder on my camera than it actually is. It's not quite so red. It's more of a secondary orange. Okay, so I'm going to grab some of this orange pile and make a bigger pile right there. Another pile. And another right here. Okay. Now, count up a little bit. There we go. I'm going to get more cadmium yellow out. Cadmium yellow. Okay. And, okay. Also looking at my reference to kind of check my ideas here. Now this orange, I'm actually going to add some white into it because there are some areas on the pumpkin where it's going into more of a highlight, and it's kind of with the highlights are so intense, they're kind of a reflection of the light source, a direct reflection of the light source, and they go usually quite cool, or they're going to reflect the color of the light. In this case, I was using a white natural light LED light, so it's looking cooler. So I'm going to take some white and add that into this orange even more. So that is for the area towards the front of my pumpkin in my reference where it's going quite light and cooler. But for other areas of the pumpkin, it's going to go more yellow. Now on the carved inside of the pumpkin, it goes quite yellow-orange. I'm going to take some of this cadmium yellow. I'm going to start by adding this. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. And I think I'm going to want something even more yellow-orange. So I'm actually going to scrape up what I just mixed and mix another step. So I'm going to put that down here. I'm going to take some of what I just mixed, put it right there. And now I'm going to add more yellow, more cadmium yellow into this pile. Okay, so you can see with yellow, it becomes a great way of mixing lighter versions of warm colors. Yellow, again, is the color, if we're looking at the colors on the color wheel, it's the color that's going to be closest to white in terms of its value. So it does have a lightening effect with value when you add it to colors. Okay, and then I'm also going to mix a kind of more neutralized yellow-orange too. So I'm gonna take some of this, some of these two piles. I'm gonna put that on the side here. And then I'm actually gonna grab some of my yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a more neutralized yellow, so it's an earth tone. I'm gonna add that in here. And that's giving me a more neutralized yellow-orange. So there's parts of the pumpkin in the shadow area where it's carved, where it's going a little bit more neutralized. I'm actually going to mix two versions of this. So more neutralized kind of yellow-orange. And then I'm also going to take a little bit of what I just mixed, some of that. I'm going to mix a darker version of this too. So I'm actually going to go and grab some of this neutral right here. Some of my dark chromatic cool neutral. Mix that into that. That's going to give me something very much like a dark kind of gray brown, but kind of within the yellow family. Okay.
Kind of cooler too, right?
Yeah, cooler. Yeah, that's going to be a theme here as well. And the lights, particularly like on our pumpkin, looking at our pumpkin, the light sections of the pumpkin are warmer, more chromatic. The shadow sections are going to be cooler and more neutralized, which makes sense because to make the shadows, we're going to be adding blue into our orange, so that cools it down and neutralizes it. Okay, so now I also want to come back over here to my oranges, and I'm going to adjust this orange a little bit. So I'm going to take some and make sure that my palette knife is clean. I don't have any of that neutral on there, so I want to keep these oranges chromatic. Okay, I'm going to grab some of these lighter oranges and mix that into this pile. I might take a little bit more pure yellow too and put that in here. So I want to keep my lights here more chromatic and warm. I'm going to get a little bit of cadmium yellow, put that in here. But I still want this to read as darker than these other yellow oranges I've mixed, so I don't want to be adding really more yellow than that. Okay, so there are some different orange options. Now we're going to go and mix the darker side. I'm going to take this, and again, clean off your palette knife. Clean it off before going back into your paint so you're not contaminating it. I'm going to move this down a little bit, this secondary orange. I definitely want to keep some of that. I'll be using that for sure. I'm going to grab some of my secondary orange and make some steps going up for my darker oranges. So starting with a bigger pile here, and a little bit less, then just a little bit. Okay, so now to mix that, to mix the shadow version of this, get a little bit more secondary orange here. So now we can apply our color theory from the color wheel. We're going to take blue. You could also take some of this too, because this is a cool kind of bluish neutral. I'm going to take blue, I'm going to mix that into orange. I'm going to see what that does. So obviously that's making it go much darker, more neutralized. And it's so dark right now, it's almost looking like black. which is great. We can be using this for really dark areas that are kind of more like an occlusion shadow or a core shadow. Now I can also tell, or maybe not, but sometimes if you mix a neutral like this and it looks really green, then if it's looking really green and you want to, neutralize it more, well, then you could add a little bit more red into it. So again, you're using the color wheel, color theory here. So if you need to neutralize something, you add the complement into that, right? So if it looks too green, add red. If it looks too yellow, add purple. Okay, so now I'll take what I just mixed, neutral, mix it into this little pile here.
It really shows how that taking that orange down, how it really gets like the burnt umber.
Yeah, exactly.
Dang.
Exactly. So then you can really see that burnt umber. Exactly. You can see that burnt umber is a really dark orange, which can feel like, if you haven't been painting for very long, it can feel like, well, that's not orange, but it's a very neutralized dark version of orange. And when you actually, with the shoe paintings we did this last week, when you take burnt umber and wipe it down, you can see the warmth underneath it. So it does have this warmth to it, which is coming from its orange, its orange nature. Okay, so now I'll take again what's on my palette knife, a little bit more, and use that to mix into this last pile.
Yeah.
Giving myself different shadow options. Okay. So again, everyone, this is all based in color theory. It's coming from that knowledge which you all have about the color wheel. So no matter what you want to paint, you can start by identifying, well, what's the local color? In this case, we're working with orange, which you also know is a warm color. And if you know that you're working with a warm color, you also know you don't want to overwhelm it with white and cool it down, right? So we're using our yellow to create some of those lighter versions and white in some sections, okay? And then also using the complement of orange to create the shadows. If I was working with a red object, well, I could still be lightening the red with yellows like I did here, or with warmer reds, and I would use green to combine with that red to create the shadows. So all of this goes back to a theory that we've all studied that you can use on your own.
I always tell my students that when they're studying that in my class, it'll really help them in painting and
Yeah,
and
definitely.
nice
Definitely.
to see a couple of my students in there. So
Yay. Awesome. Okay, so I think we are ready to get started. And if we need to come back and mix more at all, we can. So let's get back to the painting surface. Any questions before I move away from my palette view? And I'll go back and forth showing you my palette, showing you what color I'm using exactly. Right? Okay. Assuming that means no questions. So I'm gonna stop the share for a moment. All right, everyone. So let's take a short break. I need to go to the restroom, so I'm going to go away for a moment. We'll be back in about 5 minutes or so, and we'll get started painting, okay? All right, so 5 minutes.
Hey, Ron.
Amy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
You too. What are you up to? Are you in Long Beach still?
Yep.
Excellent.
But it feels like I never went anywhere, because I haven't been on campus.
Yeah.
So it's such a weird feeling.
Yeah, Armando goes there. I don't know if you know Armando, but he was a student at Rio too. He was like one of my students, and he's same thing. He just feels like that this isn't the same thing, you
Like a
know.
limbo or something. It's not real.
Yeah, I have a very hard time with it. I'm trying, but I suck at the computer. You know how I always fail at technological things, and it's like it's just completely set me up for bombing.
Tough.
But I'm trying really hard.
That's good. I'm glad you're here.
How's everything going? You're painting, you're doing stuff. What is your major?
I'm sticking with studio arts, and I applied this semester for the BFA over there.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't planning on applying, but I showed my stuff to my professor, and she's like, "I think you're ready.
Yeah.
You could apply this semester." I was like, "Really?"
Good.
So that was exciting.
That means they recognize the quality.
I think I'll hear from them sometime in November or this month. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. It's funny. I just was watching. I was going through some videos. I found a video of you playing the ukulele.
Oh no!
That was a beautiful instrument.
I will never forget that final that I missed. Oh my gosh! Barely made it.
Yeah, final schedules, and it's it's even weirder with this. So I don't know, but everything else, your whole family's healthy and everybody's doing good.
Yes, thankfully we're all good.
Gracias a Dios.
My mom is a nurse, or she's a school nurse now. She got a new job. And so she's been really strict with us. Like, don't go anywhere.
Oh, but how that's so dangerous. You know, what a job. I have got total admiration for the nurses and the doctors and what they've done. It's amazing.
Luckily, she hasn't had to work with any COVID patients. Her previous job, she was working with babies in the nursery. So her area, no one is allowed in there. So luckily, she didn't have to interact with COVID patients.
I was just in the hospital. I had a one day surgery, right? It's supposed to be go in, have the surgery, go home. Well, I had a reaction to the anesthesia. So I was in the hospital for 2 days, and they were giving me pills for the nausea. Pills for nausea. Excuse me, but those went.
Oh my gosh.
So finally they gave me a shot, and then that helped. So yeah, nausea.
I'm glad you're good. Oh,
Okay.
goodness.
So, but I was in a pediatric ward. It used to be peds at Presbyterian, and the toilets are like kindergarten toilets. You know, they're almost on the ground. So that was pretty funny. But I'm glad to be home. I don't like being in the hospital, and I've been in there way too much throughout my life. So
You were in the hospital during the COVID times though?
yeah, just 2 weeks ago.
Oh my gosh, that's scary. I really don't like going to the hospital right now.
No,
Oh, there we
not
go.
as much fun as it's cracked up to be.
Going to the hospital.
Yeah, we're just catching up.
Yay! Amy, I'm so glad you're here, and Katrina.
Great.
Yeah, I'm so glad I could make it.
My people.
I almost missed it.
Were you
It's like
sleeping?
my alarm, and I real quick had to make it. Right now I'm eating my pumpkin pie.
Oh, nice. That is awesome.
But I'm setting up my own little still life and seeing what I could
Oh,
do.
wonderful. Yay. I'm super excited for that.
So I'll be running around my room looking for stuff.
Albert, did you set up your own still life too?
No, not this time, Professor. I don't have
Oh, okay.
space. I mean, I don't have much Halloween stuff around me here.
I get it. I get it.
I hope
Okay.
I could. I'm gonna develop a. I took my son's gonna come and pose for me
Yay!
tomorrow, so I'm
That's
gonna do probably a
fantastic.
figurative. So I'm gonna do a Halloween theme figurative, or at least I'm gonna attempt to do that.
Oh, that is awesome. I am very excited to see that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any like questions over the week as you're doing that, just feel free to email me, or if you want to have an appointment or anything, we can do that too.
Definitely, Professor. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
And I'll send you the, I did a mixing demo for portraits, so I'll send
Okay.
that to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
How you doing, Professor Ron? How you doing?
I'm hanging in there.
Yay. Okay, so everyone, okay, so let's get started drawing. And I tripped over my setup, so I think it's all straight now. All right, here we go. I printed out this just to, I'll talk about on the drawing stage, kind of lining things up. So this is a good way of demonstrating running a plumb line. So remember, when you're running a plumb line, that's, you know, you can check vertically where things line up with each other. You can also check horizontally, right? So as I'm drawing something in, I can go, okay, where's the top of my Oogie Boogie? Where does that line up with other parts of my pumpkin? You can even measure. So when you're measuring something, you can put the top of that, top of your drawing utensil or paintbrush at the top of what you want to measure, your thumb at the bottom part that you want to measure. You can compare that to other things in your setup. So on a photo, it can literally be, okay, seeing how big that is. That's how, this pumpkin is, you know, not 1.5, but a little less than 1.5 Oogie Boogies, right? And then if you're doing that with a still life in at home, it's the same principle. You're doing the top of your brush at the top of that thing you want to measure, your thumb at the bottom of it. But you just want to make sure you're measuring from the same point every time. So you're keeping your arm locked, and then you're not moving around in space. You're just checking where things are from that same point, so the measurement holds true. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to start doing my drawing out, not in like the black. I'm going to go for more of like this kind of slightly above a mid gray, because I want, as I do this drawing, I don't want to put a bunch of black down. I want, when I go in to put my occlusion shadows, my darker shadows, I want them to stand out. So I'm going to start off with something a little bit darker. We'll see if this, it does show up on the canvas. So we'll start about right there. And I'm getting some medium out on my brush to make it nice and more fluid for getting this drawing in. Okay, I'm gonna move this over for the moment. Now, I always like to start off, and I'm gonna remove the spotlight from myself. So we're just looking at my drawing or my painting surface. Okay, so I like to start off by mapping in my third lines. And I just really like to do that because it helps me stay really compositionally aware right from the beginning. So remember these third lines, that is connected to the golden ratio or the rule of thirds. You can start to line things up in your composition with these third lines, and it can help you have create a more dynamic and interesting composition versus just sort of slapping something right in the center. That could be, you know, it's not that you can't ever do that, but it can just be a little bit more stagnant when you do that. So you just want to make sure you're putting something right in the center, that you're doing that consciously, not kind of as a mistake. So I'm putting in these third lines. And I'm also going to be really aware of my edges, right? and avoiding things, putting things right on the edge and creating tangents. And that's something to think of at the very beginning of your painting, or if you're creating thumbnails right in your thumbnail. It's not something you want to try to be fixing 50% of the way into your painting. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up my reference on my computer as well. Okay, there we go. All right, so now I'm gonna start to draw in. I'm gonna start with my pumpkin. Okay, and remember we're working in big shapes first, getting the general placement. I'm gonna start to, I'm gonna kind of line my pumpkin up with these third lines. So the bottom, I'm gonna put about right there. Top, down a little bit. And also have my paper towel ready where I can wipe out as needed. Okay, so giving myself little guidelines where I think the placement might be nice. So my pumpkin kind of in here, then Oogie Boogie could be more in there. So I think that will work well. So starting with getting the big shape, and I'm asking myself, okay, what kind of simple shapes am I seeing, right? And you want to do that in any kind of scenario you're working with. What simple shapes are these objects acting like? Of course, the pumpkin is essentially a sphere. And Oogie Boogie is a combination. His stomach is maybe more sphere-like a bit, and then his arms and his head definitely acting more like cones. They're coming to a tip, and the value is going to concentrate at the tip. Okay, so the general shape of my pumpkin, I'll come back later into the carving section. I'll also go in with a smaller brush for that, but for now, I'm going to continue getting things in. Okay, there's also kind of a nice diagonal with the, nice diagonal happening with the drapery in the background. So it kind of curves out like that, which I like. Diagonals, also great for making interesting compositions. So searching for introducing diagonals when you can. Okay, now I'm actually going to switch over to my smaller flat brush. So this brush, or a round brush is also great. My round brush is a little messed up because I haven't been kind to it, but getting a round brush to put the lines in for a drawing is great, or the small flat brush is good too.
That's bright.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
Professor, I'm sorry.
now, yeah.
Now that you're speaking about brushes, I've been meaning to ask, how
Mhm.
important is the quality of a brush, a brand of a brush, for an artist, or just to pick up their quality of painting? Is that?
Well, there's, that's a really interesting question. I think it can be nice to invest in a set of brushes that can hold the paint really well. But there's not really one right answer to that. There's some artists that I know who make incredibly subtle, detailed paintings, and they use brushes that they buy at a hardware store that are very crappy. So yeah, I mean, and then there's other artists who will swear by certain brands. So that becomes something that can also just be a matter of kind of personal taste. One, I
As you
will.
get better at it, though, as you get better at painting, it becomes a matter of choice.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
works best for you.
Exactly. So it's can be really finding that those brushes that you like. I like the brushes that were in our kit. I also a brand of brushes that I really enjoy is Trekell, and I'll send out a link for these brushes. And they make different brush kits too, where certain artists have selected brushes that they really enjoy from Trekell. So I like these brushes quite a bit. But you know, it becomes a really personal kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good
Thank you.
question though. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I just buy whatever brushes are on sale on Amazon and
Yeah.
trying to just find which one I like. I have so
Mhm.
many different brushes now.
Yeah, exactly. So you can find the ones that you really enjoy. I like brushes the reason I like these brushes that came in the kit is they have a nice spring to them, which I want that kind of, it's a little bit harder, a little bit of a spring to the brush. Some brushes are really floppy, which I really don't like at all. Now, as I'm putting in Oogie Boogie, I'm just sort of checking where this character should be in space. So you can check those things on your own reference or on your own setup. And I'm going to start to get rid of some of these lines so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Yeah, and the artist I was talking about who uses these hardware brushes, he just liked these kind of cheap, bristly brushes.
Chipper,
What was that?
chippers,
I think so, yeah. I think that
Yeah.
is what he used, yeah.
the wooden handle and the
Yeah,
aluminum
yeah.
barrel.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and he makes these like hyper illusionistic oil paintings with just like the cheapest, the absolute like cheapest brush.
When I used to paint murals, we used those a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean it's a great, it's a great demonstration of how it is just truly something where you just have to find something that you like. So definitely don't buy into, a kind of company telling you that you have to have a certain brush to paint or even the individual artists telling you you really need a certain brush to paint a certain way. That's really not true. It's just finding the thing that works best for you.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah.
That just answers so many questions for me.
Oh, good. Okay. I think my pumpkin might need to go maybe a little bit bigger. Okay, but I am liking the placement of things. So I like that these objects also make a kind of diagonal through the space. Okay. And now I also want to map in I am going to be painting the Christmas lights. So I want to start to get those in there too. That's going to be a big compositional element. Even if I don't get into the color today, I do want to address what's happening compositionally with those lights. I want to at least get the line.
Professor, I have a question.
them.
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
So to draw out, I usually use just like the charcoal, just because to
Yeah.
me it's easier
Yeah.
than to like do it with paint, because
Yeah.
I feel like I'll mess up like if I do it like with the paint.
Mm-hmm.
So I just did my pumpkin and my Oogie Boogie.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if I can add on the lights like after, or should I draw them out now?
I would just draw them out now.
Okay.
And then, so Signorina, usually when I draw out the charcoal, I'll also go over, once I like where the charcoal is, then I'll go over it with some paint.
Okay.
Are you planning on doing that?
I usually don't.
Okay.
I usually just keep it, and then as I start painting, I start going over with the paint. And then if I feel like it should be bigger, then I would just like paint it over to make it bigger. And then obviously the charcoal starts erasing while I start going over the paint.
Yeah.
But I normally don't, I don't trust myself with just going over just the paint. So to me it's easier because I can just erase it a lot easier, you know?
Okay. I would say then that, yeah, you could wait on the Christmas lights if you want to first just focus on painting these things
Okay.
in. Yeah.
One summer I took a painting class at LA Trade Tech.
Mm-hmm.
It was taught by the head painter for Foster and Kleiser,
Oh.
old billboard company.
Yeah.
The old billboards were all painted.
Yeah, they're really incredible.
They were amazing. Anyway, it was interesting when they do their drawings, they do it in indelible pencil. So
And then do they what's it called? Do they put like a protective layer over it?
no,
No?
they do the drawing in indelible pencil. They're painting inside,
Mm-hmm.
and the drawing always pulls forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it'll bleed right through whatever you're painting, so you can always see your drawing. And then when they go outside, they disappear because the indelible pencil is very fugitive. And
Oh, wow. That's really brilliant, actually.
yeah,
That's like really brilliant. So the sun will just fade away the pencil, because
right.
that's why I never use pencil for an oil painting. It always comes, it rises through. That's why I know it seemed easier everyone to be using pencil, but then it can really mess with your oil painting.
Yeah, well, it's
Um,
greasy.
yeah. But I heard I was watching a video the other day from I forget the artist's name, but it was through New Masters Academy. And the artist was talking about how Norman Rockwell would do all of his paintings first with the pencil drawing and then shellac it and then paint on top of that. And I guess the shellac made it so that it was just preserved but didn't rise through. I'm not sure.
Right. And he could always wipe down to his pencil drawing again.
Yeah, if he didn't like what he had painted. So I kind of want to try that.
He was an amazing painter.
Yeah, we looked at some of his
One of my favorites, yeah.
Imprimatores last week. Interesting.
That painting of the boy going off to college and him and his dad sitting on the running board of that pickup truck, and that old farmer just had that look on his face,
Mm-hmm.
pride, sadness, confusion,
Mm-hmm.
just amazing.
Yeah, it really captured expression so well. Okay.
Chloe, what are you painting on today?
This is a canvas, just a sheet of canvas that I toned with I got this mid-tone gray paint, acrylic paint. Yeah, so I'd like to just get a kind of cheaper tube of a mid-tone gray to make it really easy to tone my canvases. Okay. And then that dries so fast that I'm very impatient as a painter. So once I have an idea, I want to start painting right away, which is also why I use acrylics.
I normally just do an oil underpaint. I was wondering how you get your color so already like a solid, underpainting. That's smart.
Yeah, so I tone it first and then I'll just be painting directly onto here. So putting those colors out directly.
And it gets rid of that white canvas.
Yeah.
Which is so intimidating.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I got the big general placement here. Now, I'm also going to map in the folds in kind of a general way, and then I'm going to start to get into the carved parts of my pumpkin and my Oogie Boogie before I start really painting in big planes. But even in this drawing layer, I don't have to get super, super detailed. As I start to paint, I'll gradually work up into detail. I just want to make sure that I really like the big placement here, and the sort of big ideas. Okay, so let's get some of those folds. The folds are also going to give us some nice diagonals. It's part of why I chose this photo. The folds coming out from the pumpkin are really cool. And they're leading you back into the pumpkin, back in space, and then out again. So you want to be thinking, how do I get the viewer's eye moving all around, not just staying stagnant on one thing? Okay.
Design principles.
Yeah, exactly. It all goes together. All of these different arts are connected.
See, you guys, I told you.
Told you so. Ron, have you ever done a stop motion?
No.
Really?
Well, I made a stop motion movie one time of just some toys and stuff running around, but that was, but never of a demonstration. I should for.
Oh yeah, I meant like a stop motion movie.
Yeah, just for fun.
That's cool.
Place I used to live had a big building with a giant wall behind us across the alley, and we used to show movies out the window of my place.
Oh, like projector or like any movie or projector of movies?
Project movies that one time it was a movie that my friend had done, an animated movie, but we'd show cartoons or Laura
Yeah.
or King Kong or whatever the heck we were interested in doing.
Yeah,
It was fun.
that's really cool. I was watching Nightmare Before Christmas last night.
I was too.
Oh, really? It's so good. I love it so much. It's just such a great movie. I think my favorite part is when the trick-or-treaters are in the bathtub and the bathtub like gets up like a horse and it has those claw feet. So creative.
Yeah, wonderful playing with images and what if.
Yeah.
Really like those diagonals coming in right there. They do so much.
Yeah, right? Getting those diagonals in really leads you around.
Totally whimsical.
Yay.
And it makes it more active.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's kind of get into our jack-o'-lantern. Jack skeleton, jack-o'-lantern.
I carve them out of cantaloupes.
What?
Yeah, that way I got a jackalope.
Stop. Oh my God. Do you carve a jackalope, jack-o'-lantern?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Do you have one? You have to show
I gotta
us.
make one this year.
Ron.
But they're fun to do.
Yeah.
And it's just silly.
I love it. Oh my God. You're so
Somewhere in my neighborhood, some family went all out and they put the Jack the Skeleton on top of the roof. So like on the peak of the roof, and it's just this huge thing, and his legs are just dangling all the way
Oh,
over the
cool.
whole roof. And I was like, oh my God.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
I have two sisters that are friends of ours that every year they live out towards La Habra, right on the border of Whittier and La Habra. They do an incredible setup every year. Takes them a whole month.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
I had a couple of those neighbors that you see them like in the beginning of October, just like
Yeah.
that first week. They have a couple of the graveyards by the end of the month. It's like the whole cemetery.
Fully, yeah. I have one neighbor who just keeps it up all year round, but then she's like obsessed with Halloween. She has these like giant inflatable things in her yard all year, and then
Yeah.
like during Halloween it gets like really amped up and her just entire yard is covered. It's really funny when I walk my friend's dog, he gets like very freaked out by the giant
yeah.
inflatable cats.
Do you guys get trick-or-treaters in your neighborhood?
I haven't spent this is gonna be my first Halloween here,
Oh,
so I'm not sure. I think we do, but of course, pandemic, I'm not sure what's happening this
I
year.
know. Normally we have a whole bunch of kids and we're like, I think we're gonna get kids. Should we just close our gate? Like, just so no one comes in? Should we leave a bowl out there? I don't know.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about
Just in case
that.
it
Like,
gets
do I leave a
bigger.
bowl? Yeah.
Next to some hand sanitizer. I don't know.
Yeah. A bowl of hand sanitizer.
Like the
That's a
giveaway.
sad Halloween.
Oh, give them all the little bottles.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't know what
Weird
kids
year.
are gonna do.
I know. It's such. I mean, so what we're doing. My friends have a 3-year-old, so we're all getting dressed up, and we kind of have like a quarantine bubble basically, and their friends are like in our bubble, and so he has his little 3-year-old friend Hazel. So we're gonna do like a tiny trick or treat in our backyard.
My cousins do that for their little ones that they have
Oh yeah,
with their
yeah,
close to the immediate family. That's
yeah,
sweet.
yeah. Also, I heard this like really good idea from one of my TAs in my other classes. She said that her family, they're going to take Easter eggs and fill them with Halloween candy, and then do like a Halloween Easter egg thing, like hiding those all over, which I thought was a really
Oh,
good
that's
idea.
funny. That's nice.
Yeah.
But you don't have to give it to them. They have to find it.
Yeah, exactly. They have to seek it out.
They have to work for it.
Yeah. Okay. So like getting all this in here. This is our most complicated painting yet. And everyone will do this until 12:30, and I'm not gonna have this totally finished, but I will finish this later today, and I'll take a video of that and put that into our canvas as well, and onto my YouTube if anyone else wants to see it. Okay, so now an important thing with our jack-o'-lantern, there's these different planes in here. So this isn't just cut out, one shape. There's also that little plane in here that's also being hit by light, because I underlit this still life, so it's lit from below, kind of gives it a more ominous feeling. And so that light is hitting these planes right here and lighting them up. Okay, so let's map in the details on our Oogie Boogie, and then we can get started painting. When I rewatched Nightmare Before Christmas, I realized really how creepy it is. I was like, I can't believe I saw this as a really little kid.
Actually, when I was little, I would not watch it because it would freak me out. And so like,
Yeah.
when I was older, when I realized like, oh, it's a whole stop motion, then like,
Yeah.
I really appreciated it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the stop motion's incredible, and the characters are really cool. It's just like for a little kid, it is really creepy.
Like those kids that are trick-or-treaters, those are creepy kids.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, they're talking about cutting up Santa Claus.
Right.
And
It's kind of traumatizing.
yeah, it is.
That's a lot
My
to cut up.
my 2-year-old nephew is like completely obsessed with that movie.
Really?
Yes. And at first we were all like, and he has my older one is 4 years old, and he's not about it.
Mhm. Oh,
And
yeah.
the little one, like, he loves like all Halloween stuff. He's been singing Halloween songs. Like, he likes YouTube, so like he's
Mhm.
been singing Halloween songs for like the past couple months. And we always laugh because I'm like, dude, like, he's so crazy.
Yeah.
Like he's 2 years old and he's like all into that. Like, he loves like skeletons, and he's like, he thinks it's so cool. So we always
Interesting.
laugh because I'm like, you're not a regular 2-year-old.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe he's at the age too where he doesn't fully realize like what all of it is, you know? Because I feel like my friend's 3-year-old, he's now 3 and he's starting to realize that some things are scarier. So he's getting more afraid of stuff when he wasn't so afraid as it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or he's just a little, Halloween goth kid at heart.
Yeah.
When Lindsay was little, she wouldn't watch the pink elephants on parade in Dumbo. That whole scene, she would go outside the room and look around the corner. And when that was over, then she'd go back in and watch it. But
It is a little bit creepy too, that
oh yeah,
that whole like, hallucinogenic scene in Dumbo.
very dolly.
Yeah, it is very dolly, totally. Okay, so I'm about ready to get started painting, putting in the values and colors here. Now I do kind of want to talk about the lighting situation a little bit before I get started. So again, I'm under lighting it, right? And as you started painting, you always kind of want to think, well, even as you're setting it up, you want to really intentionally light your still life, right? Get a clear shadow family, clear light family. As I said, I lit this from below. So I had a light source kind of down over here, which can really give it a feeling of being spooky and ominous when you light things from below. And actually, if you watch Nightmare Before Christmas, you'll see that. There's scenes where Jack is lit from below with like a colorful light that he looks really creepy. And there's other scenes where he's lit more from above and it's a different sort of cooler light and it has a totally different feel. So the way you decide to light something makes a huge impact. And so I just want to have this awareness right from the beginning that my shadow side is going to be more on the kind of left-hand side of my objects, and the more intense lights are going to be from below and from the right. So I'm keeping that in mind, and I'm going to maintain that light logic throughout. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to pan back to my palette for a moment, and I'm going to begin on my pumpkin. So here we go. Okay, and I'm gonna start, I'm gonna work in this method, working from darkest areas to lightest areas. I'm working from this general to specific method. So the darkest values in the pumpkin are kind of the core shadows on the pumpkin itself. Then also in the carved inside of the pumpkin, it gets quite dark. And I'm actually thinking I might need something that's more like kind of this darker value that I've mixed, but I'm also going to combine it with some of this darker kind of black neutral right here to get something just a little bit darker. Make sure that you all can see that. Yeah, okay. For those parts inside of the eye sockets of the pumpkin that get really dark. So using some of my darkest darks from my orange value scale, and then also a little bit of that really dark neutral from the ultramarine blue and burnt umber. So let's try that. Okay, back to the painting. And as always, if you have any questions, just feel free to shout them out. Okay, so it gets quite dark through here. Okay. A little bit lighter in there, but this dark shapes, I'm squinting, seeing what that dark shape is like. I might actually just fill in this entire socket, this darker value, not this plane where it's getting lit up, but I'm gonna make this all a little bit darker, and then I'll adjust some parts of it to make it, there are some parts that go a little bit warmer. I'll do that later. So first I'm getting in that entire dark shade. Now on this side, it's just this little triangle in here, and the rest of that socket, we're seeing the side of the pumpkin. So mapping that in dark. Okay. And I also need to get my smaller brush here to start to get into the nostrils are really dark, kind of in the center. So popping that darkest value in here. Okay. Also on this side. All right, and then parts of the mouth are also going quite dark too. Parts of it are also lighter, like those side planes of the pumpkin, but we can see in here where there's not much light penetrating back in the pumpkin, it's essentially kind of acting like an occlusion shadow, goes very, very dark. So we'll continue putting that value in back through here. And I like to work in this method of working from dark to light, especially when I'm oil painting. One, because it helps me just kind of organize my thoughts with the value. So I kind of know, all right, I'm gonna address these different parts of the shadow and light family, and I'm gonna work in this strategic way, starting with more of my occlusion shadows, then my coarse shadow, shadow mask, kind of gradually work my way into the light. But also with oil paint, if you put down a big area of white or lighter paint, and then you realize it's not the right value, and you have to try to paint darker on top of it, well, if you're trying to paint on top of that wet light paint, it's not going to work out for you. It's always going to go kind of milky. So then you just have to wait until it's dry to paint back over it, which can take a long time. So if instead you're a little bit more strategic from the beginning, that can really help you. Okay. So through there. All right, now, and this isn't super great photo, but you have your own photo too on your device to look at that's a little bit more accurate. I just want to point out though, you have this whole shadow side, which is also going quite dark. There's parts in the stem that go quite dark, so I'll map that in with the same value. As we get into more of the shadow though, we're going to go back into that original kind of darkest orange that we laid in. We want the dark values we just put down to really read as the darkest. So as we get into this shadow mask, we're going to go a step lighter. Okay, so again, parts of those stem, kind of like in here, sort of middle parts of the stem are going quite dark. So getting that in. And then also where the pumpkin itself has been carved, that's going quite dark in some of those lines too. So I'll map that in at the same value. So really dark right there. Okay. Now these will be interesting because there's a really dark next to a light. There's some of the inner part of the pumpkin that's exposed that goes quite light. Okay, and then these other parts of the pumpkin over here, I actually can't see too well. It kind of blends into shadow, so I'm gonna leave that. All right, now before I get into the shadow mask and then also Oogie Boogie's casting a shadow on the pumpkin, I want to put in the occlusion shadow at the bottom of the pumpkin. And I'm gonna use, for the occlusion shadow, I'm gonna use this very dark neutral, this cool neutral that we mixed. So that's for reserving for occlusion shadows. Okay. So, and remember that's just at the bottom of the object where it's touching down on the table. This does not extend up the pumpkin like a cartoon outline. It's just along the bottom where it's touching that tabletop. Occlusion shadows are happening where two objects are touching and light isn't penetrating through. Okay. So let's start to get into more of the shadow mass on our pumpkin. And I might actually stay with a smaller brush since my pumpkin is a little bit small on my painting. So I'm going to begin with, let's see. I'm going to begin with this darkest value, at least for putting in the core shadows. And then more of the shadow mass, I'll probably move down a little bit to this next shade down. And first though, I just want to get some of this darkest orange on my painting and see what it looks like. So sometimes, there can always be that difference between what you think your color will look like and then what it actually looks like on the canvas. So this is actually maybe a little bit lighter than I thought it was going to be. But this could be nice for putting in my shadow mask. So I'm gonna put in the shadow mask, and I'm gonna come back in after and put in some darker areas using some of that cooler neutral to intensify the core shadows. So first I'm gonna get a larger brush so I start to map in this whole shadow. And as you're painting, again, if your paint starts to feel really fuzzy on the surface, that most likely means that you need to get some more paint on your brush, and that you could get some more medium on it as well. Okay, so what I'm seeing is the shadow is kind of coming through here. Also kind of comes along the bottom. And then there's another shadow over here from Oogie Boogie casting onto the pumpkin. That really comes through almost up through the socket over there. Now I'm going to map in, and it kind of goes through there. There are parts of the shadow that I'll be lightening, but I'm going to start by just getting that shadow mask down, so I can see what that looks like as a kind of graphic shape. And sometimes when you're just putting in the shadows, things can look a little bit weird, but as we start to put in the light, things start to really sort of click into focus. So part of that, you kind of just have to have a little bit of faith in the process, establishing those shadows first. Now I can also, something that could be nice to do, so I'm gonna put just a note of what that secondary orange looks like to see if things are kind of making sense. I'm grabbing some of that first orange that we mixed. That's gonna be kind of existing in here. Okay. So that's kind of where we're going. And then I'm gonna grab a little bit of my, my lighter yellow oranges and put that, just a little note of that for right now, where that's going to be in the eye socket. You can start to get a sense that that's going to look good. Okay. So I'm going to continue my shadow mask up here. Now on this side, in the shadows, often you're not going to see as much kind of detail. And the pumpkin is a good example of that, because if you're looking at the reference, it's a lot harder to see these carved, that top of the pumpkin where it's been carved in that shadow mask. So it's showing more in the light section. So the shadow mask is kind of extending through here. And for now, at least, I can bring this back later, but I'm just going to simplify this and all paint it in this value. I'm kind of simplifying in the shadows. Okay. And getting in the shadow parts of my stem.
Huh?
They come up,
What?
they come up.
A little bit. There, you're good.
Okay, so now we can start to get into some of these other oranges. Now, so let's go back to the palette for a moment. So now I'm getting into some lighter portions of the shadow. I'm going to start to use this orange and see what this looks like. So this kind of more orangey brown. Let's go back to the painting. So as I'm looking at my reference, there's parts in here that, yeah, that's gonna work. So where it's kind of a transition in between the light and dark, right? And here it's lighter and brighter. Right here though, it's more of a kind of transition value. I'm going to be putting in this kind of brown orange. Okay. And the same thing through here and through the top as well. So, put that in there. I'm really going to focus on the pumpkin for right now, since we haven't painted an orange object like this before together. But Oogie Boogie, he's essentially just from that cool neutral. So if I don't get to him today, you will see it in the demo video, but you also have approached an object like that before with the simple objects to life. Okay. Right. Okay, parts of this do go a little bit darker, so I'm going to go back to some of that darker, the darker orange that I've mixed. Especially so like in this little sliver right here, it's kind of darker towards the top. You can kind of blend those together. Same thing kind of over in here, it's a little darker towards the top. And then through the top here, it gets a little bit darker too. Now on this side of my pumpkin, there is also a bit of light in the background here. So through here, I actually want to put in a little bit of that light right now, just to be able to compare the values that I'm placing down to something. I'm not going to map that in extensively, but I am going to grab, let's see, I'm going to grab a little bit of one of my lighter grays. Maybe even something in between this light gray and this one. And just put in a little bit of the value around the pumpkin to get some context. So value and color, it's all relative. Bring in a little bit of that. Through here. I'm also going to put in some of this darker gray, again, just to be able to compare these values. And for that, I'm going to go to, it's not the darkest gray by any means. It's going to be something kind of in between this, I think, and this one. Okay, so I'm going to be placing that value down. I just want to give myself a little bit of context. Okay. And maybe some of the darker value back here too. Okay, so now I'm going to return to just sort of thinking about my pumpkin. Okay. So I'm going to go back into this top a little bit more. It's going to be one of my darker browns. Let's see if you can see that. That's what's on my brush. So the top of the sliver, just kind of a little shadow coming down. The sliver has that shadow coming down. Okay. And then gets a little bit lighter in here, I'm going to be popping in this kind of brown, slightly lighter brown down orange. Same thing I was using in here. I'm going to start putting that in here. And then there are probably parts that I'll pop out a little bit brighter. But I'm going to start off a little bit more subtle, and then I can brighten it up later. Okay. Right, so now I want to start placing some of these lighter oranges. So it's getting quite a bit brighter within here. So now I'm going to start going into more of going more into this secondary orange and then this lighter orange right here too. These more yellow oranges are going to be more for the carved sections of the pumpkin, but the brighter sections on the face of the pumpkin are more within this range. And after I place my lights, I can also go back into areas of shadow and kind of finesse them a little bit more. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. And I'll definitely go through and kind of review your paintings before you leave today. You can also really see here that as you start to put down chromatic color pops forward. And it really comes forward, and it feels like it's coming forward in space, which is also why when you're painting an object like this, if you have a more neutral shadow that starts to recede back, and the more chromatic color comes forward. So it helps you get a sense of dimension in your work when you're aware of what the chroma is doing. Okay, it's gonna be a little bit more chromatic through here. We got top of the pumpkin. And I can also, so it's a little bit more chromatic right here, and then it kind of becomes more neutral as it goes up, and I can kind of place that paint down, and I can come in with my other brush and kind of blend that up. into this other paint that I've laid down. Okay. Now this needs to, some of this more chromatic color comes through here a little bit more. All right, and I also want to put, I'm going to be going into these shadows a little bit more. There's some areas that can lighten up a little bit and go a little bit more chromatic. And I do want to place my, some of these yellow oranges to get a sense of what those are doing too. So let's go to the palette. I'm going to start off placing some of these kind of yellow oranges in here. And then some of the really bright sections will go over in here. Some of the shadow sections I'll be using more of this neutralized yellow orange that I created. So, bring that in there. And those are also happening in the mouth too. Okay, some of the shadow sections, I'm going to start using some of that neutralized. See what this neutralized yellow orange looks like. So here. And I'm realizing this dark shadow can come down a little bit more. So I'm going to put that in. Okay. And here's more of the light sections on that yellow orange. Getting those in. So we're starting to get a sense of form. Again, I think this, let's see. This orange needs to come in a little bit more. All right, in the mouth, this yellow orange is going through here. This does need to go darker in one section before I continue that yellow orange. Essentially, any little planes that are being hit by light where the pumpkin is carved, it's going to go into that brighter yellow orange, including there's part in the nose that does that too. So that becomes an indication that that plane is being hit by that underlight. And this light doesn't continue all the way on the mouth. It's really more kind of on this side. Right here, it's being hit by that cast shadow, so we're not seeing those planes being hit up by a light. Okay, kind of top of the tooth. Being hit by light. The top of the tooth here. Okay, now I also want to kind of come into the side of my pumpkin. It's going to be going in a little bit. So now this side of the pumpkin, it's still in shadow, but it's a little bit lighter than what I've been putting down. I'm going to go back. Let's see. I'm realizing maybe I need something in between this kind of brown and then maybe this secondary orange. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to kind of customizing off of the value scale that I mixed. Let's see if that works. This edge is a little bit better. And my pumpkin is also, it looks like I squeezed it at the bottom, so I'm going to round it out at the bottom a little bit more. Okay. Now I'm going to go into these little, these different shapes of values and colors that I put down. I'm going to blend it a little bit. I'm going to soften these edges. And then I'm going to come back in and paint the pumpkin has these kind of ridges to it, right? That kind of ridge texture. So first I'm going to soften the values I've put down and then come back in and establish these ridges. And the ridges are also kind of formed, so they're folding, it's kind of folding in on itself a little bit. It's not quite an occlusion shadow, but it almost kind of acts like an occlusion shadow because it's a form folding in on a form, making it harder for the light to penetrate down into it. Okay, soften that shape a bit. So even though there's still more detail to put into this, there is a sense of kind of value that is working. Okay, so now I'm going to do just a few ridges, then I'd love to check in on your paintings and see what you're doing. So I'm going to grab more of my really dark orange that I've mixed and start to place in some of these ridges. So it's kind of like that. the ridge goes, and it's curving, the ridges curve with the pumpkin, so don't do these straight lines, right? You have to think of that form, think of that simple shape that this pumpkin is. And even if your ridges aren't placed exactly where the ridges are in the pumpkin, that's okay, but it should still follow the form of this thing, right? And so as the ridges go this way, it's curving that way. This other side, they're curving that way. So you want to work with that kind of logic. And you don't have to do it up the entire pumpkin, you could just be indicating it in different sections. Okay, and then the ridge also is going to have a bit of a shadow on the left-hand side. A bit of a shadow. And then more towards the right-hand side of these ridges, it gets brighter. Brighten that up. So even the ridges are following that same light logic, being lit from below, lightening up on the right-hand side. And popping in the lights on these ridges with more of that secondary orange. And I want to show more of the detail of the ridges as it gets into the light section of the pumpkin. I might even just leave this side of the shadow side of the pumpkin just as it is. So just kind of simplified it, but bring up more of the detail in the light, which also makes that feel like it's coming forward. Okay, and then on this other side too, a little bit more light on this side. And on some of these ridges, I'm going to pop in more of this brighter secondary orange. For example, this ridge on the pumpkin, and make that pop up. So really getting a sense of form is all about paying attention to the actual values that you're seeing, having control over those values. Okay. And I'm just going to lighten this edge a little bit to get more of a sense of that secondary light. And I'm mixing more of my secondary orange in with my browned down orange. I don't want it to be too bright in the reflected light, but I do want it to be a little bit lighter through there. And also there's a little bit of reflected light coming through here on this ridge in here. And it's a subtle difference, but starts to give it a sense of dimension. And also there's a little bit of reflected light in there too. Remember on the edges of shadows, there's that reflected light. A little bit through here. Okay. All right, that pumpkin is starting to pop. It's almost 12:30, so I want to see what you all are doing. Who wants to share one of their paintings? Anybody? These people from my class. Albert, how about you?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm just picking the shapes.
Okay, I'm going to add a spotlight. Nice. Look at that. I think your shadow could your shadow mask got a little bit eaten up by the light.
Yep.
So bring that shadow down a little bit more, but it's still looking really good. And you are getting a sense of dimension.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't happy with the shadow, so that's what I'm working on.
Okay, nice. Great. Awesome.
Thank
It's
you.
looking so good. Cool. All right. Who else? Who else would like, let's see a few more. Amy, you're not in my class, but do you want to share what you've been painting?
I haven't been painting it, but
Oh,
I just set up my still life and I'm
Uh-huh.
sketching. And
can
this
we
is
see
kinda
your
like
still life?
I don't know. Okay, it's gonna be right. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna add a spotlight to you. And Amy was a Rio Hondo student, graduated from Rio Hondo, and is now at Long Beach.
Yes.
And she's so talented, oh my gosh.
There it is.
Ooh, yes, exciting.
Nice.
Oh, I'm so excited to see that later.
Yeah, I'll keep
Yay,
posting on Instagram.
very cool, very cool. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for sharing
So
that.
that's what I'm gonna and I did I just put the
Oh, okay, so
Cool.
you just,
that.
yeah.
So that's where I am right now.
Very cool. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Anybody else? Come on, at least two more people. Katrina, have you been painting? Katrina Long, who's muted.
No, I haven't been painting.
Boo.
I've just been watching you. I miss it.
Aw. Thank you, Katrina. We'll have to do more
Ariana?
demos together. Yeah, Ariana, where's Ariana? Ariana? Are you here? I don't see her.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh,
My dog ran over it when I went to the bathroom, so I'm fixing it right now.
Run! Oh God. Do you not want to share it then?
No, I
Okay.
no, it's like really
All
messed
right.
up.
Well, I will give you all feedback later, by the way. So I'll definitely want to see these later. I'll have these due next week. If you need a little bit of extra time, that's okay. But if you've mixed out your colors today, you're gonna want to just use those, so you're not having to remix it multiple times. Let's get one more person to share. One more person. Ariana, what about you? I'm sure you've been doing something great.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Okay. Because when you said it, the other person, I thought you meant me, so I was confused.
No.
I was like,
Let's
"Who
see
is
it.
that?" That is what I have so far.
Oh, can you tip it like up a little? Okay, nice. Nice.
Let's see what's going on.
I think the shadows could probably end up going a bit darker, and then also the lights could even go a little bit lighter because it's kind of living in the mid-tone zone right now. So you just want to intensify those different ends of the value scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think particularly the shadows will help with that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Still looking good though. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording for now.